This is the quick fix. We've got some worn chain rings on this bike that we're going to replace. To get started, we need just a few things. First, we need our chain rings. In this case, we're going to replace the chainring bolts as well, which we normally recommend. And you'll need a 5mm Allen wrench, which can be this style or something like that. And of course, the chainring bolt tool, depending on the type of bolts that you're using. To begin with, we need to do a couple of assessments. First of all, are we replacing chain rings of the same size, or are we going bigger or smaller? If we're going to larger chain rings, we will need to move the derailleur so that it will be up out of the way and the larger chain rings will be able to fit on. In this case, we're putting the same size chain rings on, so we should be able to leave the derailleur alone. Our next step is to get the chain off the big ring to shift down onto the bottom ring. Now it's on the small ring, we can get set to go. We simply start by removing chainring bolt. And often these bolts are a little bit stuck in there. So when the one, in this case the male threaded one, comes out, you can push it back in there and just kind of push until the back end comes loose from the chainring. We'll go ahead and undo all the rest of the bolts. Now before we take this last chainring bolt all the way out, we have to recognize that there's nothing holding that small ring on, and it's a little bit under tension because of the chain. So we can take the chain ring now, the large chain ring, off, and as long as we hold that small chain ring attached, not attached, but just on the little rest of the back of the crank, then it will stay there. And the easiest way to deal with that is to carefully grab the chain ring, pull the chain off of it, and out of the way, like so. At this point, we can take and work this chain ring off of the crank without having to remove it. Now that we have the chain rings off, is an ideal time to clean up the crank itself on these little arms. Make sure that there's no dirt in there that is going to interfere with the mounting of the next ring, and also to clean a little bit around the crank and the frame down here where it's so hard to get to with the rings on. Now that we've got it all cleaned up, we're ready to put the new rings on. The ring will go in this orientation. The tab, there's both a mechanical tab as well as the indicator there that will line up with the crank arm. The other part number over here, the laser etching, is all on the same side for Wickworks rings. We'll put this on and gradually work it up here around the crank arm. We'll make sure that everything seats right, there's no grit, anything there. Then holding it in place, we'll carefully pull the chain up and around the chain rings. Most times we also recommend that you change the chain at the same time that you change the chain rings. So that is shown in another video. Make sure that the alignment is right by putting a chainring bolt through the back there. And while holding it, we'll get out the big chain ring. Its orientation is according to this pin that goes then behind the crank arm. So we will put it on like so. It goes round nice and smoothly. Does the alignment. Simply put on the other end of the bolt in like so. And we're going to turn it in, but we are not going to turn it tight. We just want it to hold the small chain ring on so that it doesn't pop off. We still want this chain ring to be loose so that the other chain ring bolts, when they go in, will be able to stay aligned, find alignment. The other chainring bolts are pretty simple, same sort of thing. each go in. Now that we have all the bolts in, it's time to tighten them. Come along and just tighten each one, just appropriate torque. And after I get them all reasonably tight, then I go back through sort of in a star pattern and get them actually tight. And then do the final touch, just make sure that everything is all tight all the way around. And I like to count my bolts as I go, make sure that I've got all 5 of them tight. And try not to over tighten, especially if you're using alloy bolts, aluminum bolts as opposed to steel ones. And there we are. Should be completely set now. We're going to check now derailleur adjustment. And in this case, we wouldn't expect derailleur adjustment to change because we've changed the chain rings directly. But if they need adjustment, please see our video about derailleur adjustment.